r/no sleep, posted by user travisliebert. I've been a search and rescue diver for 12 years. We see a lot of strange and disgusting things, but what I saw last week has me questioning both my job and reality. Part 1. I've been involved with water search and rescue for 12 years now. I've seen a lot of upsetting and even unexplainable things in my time, but those pale in comparison to what I saw recently. Water search and rescue is often a depressing job. When someone gets lost in a forest, they can still be found alive days later. But when we get a call, it's almost always a body recovery. People don't last long in the water. I can't tell you exactly where, but I live in the Northern Territory known for its water sports. Fishing, kayaking, diving, whatever it is, our waters probably have a solid reputation for it. Despite that, this area isn't some kind of resort. The waters here are cold and oftentimes vicious. Search and rescue operations here can be grueling, and not many stick with it. There are a few older guys who have been doing it longer than me, but I'm one of the most experienced around. Like I said before, this job is more body recovery than anything, especially here. We save more live moose from the water than live humans. And when we get a call about a missing child, well, we'd be better off just giving our condolences. That's just how the waters are here. Our small town has one of the highest drowning rates in the country, but we look anyway, and usually we find a body. I've considered quitting many times in my career. Most people quit after their first recovery. In training, we try to emphasize just how much water can distort a corpse, but nothing can prepare you for the harsh reality. It's not uncommon for us to find bodies bloated beyond recognition. Sometimes they barely even seem human. A lot of divers don't last long after seeing something like that. But I continued to do it. After all these years, I figured if I didn't, then no one would. However, the thing I saw last week may have made me reconsider that decision. I got a call around 11 a.m. A father had taken his 10-year-old son fly fishing. At one point, the father managed to stab the hook all the way through his finger. He went back up to his truck to get a first aid kit. The boy was gone when he returned a few minutes later. When I first heard the story, I hung my head in silence for a moment. It had been raining heavily for almost a month now, and the waters were running faster than ever. To make things worse, it was unusually cold for the season. A number of people had gone missing in recent weeks. Many of them have yet to be found. I had little hope of finding this boy alive. Me and a couple other divers were at the site where the boy went missing within an hour, and a larger search and rescue team located a few towns over was heading our way. We talked with the father and even searched the forest for a bit, hoping that he had just wandered off. But eventually, we realized that we would have to begin searching in the river. The moment I got in the water, I knew the boy was gone. The current was worse than it had ever been, and even I had difficulty navigating the icy river. We looked for hours in the surrounding areas, and even expanded our search once the larger team had arrived. The boy was nowhere to be found. I was surprised. I hadn't expected to find him alive, but I had at least anticipated finding a body. However, there was no trace of him. The sun got low and the air grew colder. We were considering calling it off as nightfall approached and resuming the search the next day when I discovered something. There's a lot of creek beds around the river. Many of them have dried up as a result of encroaching vegetation or man-made efforts to divert the water. We usually don't pay attention to them. However, with all of the recent rain, I noticed that one of the larger creek beds had begun flowing again. A surprising amount of water crashed through it, easily enough to carry a young boy. The creek ran directly across a bend in the river, connecting it at 2 points. I followed it and realized that the boy could be located outside of our initial search area. As I approached where the creek reconnected with the main river, I felt a sinking feeling in my gut. There's a place in the river where not even search and rescue divers are supposed to go. It's known as bad water. This area lies on half of the river and runs for about 100 yards. It's a near densely vegetated area, so we don't often have to worry about people swimming there, but a lot of disappearances occur around the surrounding waters. Despite that, I've been warned not to dive there since I began doing search and rescue. Supposedly, the undercurrent is so strong that even the most experienced swimmers would be swept in an instant. Don't go near bad water. It was a mantra of the older divers. The creek ended exactly in the center of the bad water region. As I reached it, I stopped and chewed my lip thoughtfully. If I went back and reported this to the other divers, they would tell me to let it go. They wouldn't let me dive there. But deep down, I felt like the boy's body must be tangled up in some weeds nearby. If only I could find it. I hated the idea of that kid being sucked down there, slowly bloating and rotting away while his parents sat at home wondering where their boy had gone. Bad water didn't seem to be that bad. I'd seen rougher waters before, but I knew looks could be deceiving. Just below the surface, it could be flowing faster than I had ever imagined, and I'd be swept away in an instant. Besides, I wasn't supposed to dive alone. I almost turned back, but something made me stay. I stared into the river for a moment, thinking about the boy. Then I put on my gear and dropped into the icy waters. The first thing I noticed was the current seemed pretty weak. As a matter of fact, it was weaker than the rest of the river. The water was extremely deep there, and I could only see the blackness below as I dove. I kicked deeper and deeper, thinking that the current might pick up lower down, but the opposite seemed to be true. The water was almost completely still. I went even deeper until finally green shapes began to materialize in front of me. I thought I'd finally reached a bed of weeds, but as I kicked lower, the truth came into full view. I felt vomit come up at the sight, an odd and dangerous sensation when you're wearing a scuba mask. Countless arms stuck up from the ground below. I thought I had come up on a trove of bodies, but the disgusting reality became even more apparent only a moment later. The arms grew directly into the ground. They even had roots that spread out from the base. It was as if somebody had cut off hundreds of arms at the shoulder and planted them there. They were green, and I watched as they clutched the water around them. They varied in size and seemingly in age. Grotesque baby hands sprouted near the bottom, and they opened and closed their fists hungrily. It was then that I saw the boy. His eyes stared sightless ahead as those grotesque arms pulled his dead body downward. It seemed that they had just gotten a hold of him. The arms yanked at him, burying him in the surrounding sediment. They pushed and writhed and squirmed until he was securely buried up to the chest. I stared in mesmerized horror. That was when the other bodies came into focus. There must have been at least 4 more, all in varying stages of decay. Some were bloated beyond recognition, only bulky white masses that protruded loosely from the riverbed. I once again felt vomit rising in my throat, and I swallowed it back down. The fucking hands were feeding off the bodies, using them as fertilizer. The moment I clambered out of the water, I tore my mask off and retched. I couldn't stop thinking about those disgusting bodies. Those grasped hands. They were like some sort of carnivorous plant. Yet, they were so humanoid. I vomited again at the thought. I frantically ran back to our base camp and pulled one of the other divers aside. Moose was the most experienced person on our team. He'd been diving for over 20 years since moving here. I told him about what I saw. When I finished, he stared at me in cold silence. I told you never to go near bad water. His voice contained an iciness that even his thick Louisiana accent couldn't conceal. That's what you're concerned about? I was incredulous. He placed his hand on my shoulder and squeezed tightly. Don't tell anyone else about this. If the others find out you went into bad water. He trailed off and thought for a moment. Well, it won't be good. He shook his head like a disappointed father. But what are those things? I tried to keep my voice down, hoping no one would hear us. How many people have died because of those fucking things? Shut up, Moose said. We have an agreement. There's a reason they only grow in bad water. Don't fuck this up. I started to say something, but the words caught in my throat. He was keeping something from me. He sighed, and I saw something like sadness behind his eyes. Sometimes, you have to decide between the lesser and greater evils. Even the best possible decisions can still keep you up at night. He went silent for a moment and only stared at me. Don't tell anyone about this. Maybe one day, you'll understand. He walked away after that and called off the day's search. Despite what I told him, we continued to search for the next 2 days. By the third day, we called it off completely and gave our condolences to the family. I don't know what the fuck is happening. Moose has been acting different towards me ever since. There's an iciness to him, but every now and then, he'll shoot me a knowing glance, like we're on the same secret together. I've noticed the older divers acting strangely too. What did he mean by agreement? What the fuck were those armed things? I'm considering quitting and moving away from here. I can't live with the knowledge that those things are down there, slowly feeding off the body of a young boy, among countless others. I wanted to just forget about the things I saw, but no matter how hard I try, I can't erase them from my mind. I'd like to think that I'm a good man, but there comes a point where sheer terror outweighs one's sense of decency, no matter how good you are. I think I've reached that point. I wasn't planning on writing this, but more things have happened, and I found out something horrible. There's no other way to explain it. I don't know how much longer I can remain here. I can't sleep anymore. I just keep dreaming about those fucking things I saw. I've been plagued by nightmares about them for the past 2 nights. It always seems so real. At first I'm asleep in my bed, and then suddenly those arms are rising from the darkness around me, pinning me down and covering my mouth. I struggle, but they're so strong. I especially remember the fucking smell. It's like old grass clippings and rotten fish mixed together. The next thing I know, I'm awake, retching with tears streaming down my face. However, even those terrible dreams are nothing compared to what has happened in the past 2 days, especially compared to what I saw last night. I don't know what I make of it. I've packed my bags. I think I might leave soon. I need to get away from this fucking place. A couple of days ago, not long after my initial post, I received a call about a body found near the river. I felt a cold sensation in my gut when I got there and realized that it had been found right where the boy had disappeared. I approached the bank to see Moose and 2 others standing over what a body. Their backs were to me, and I could hear one of them speaking angrily. He was practically shouting, "Shit! Shit! Shit!" It was Clyde, one of the other more experienced SAR divers. As I got closer, I saw the other one was Ryan. I felt chills run down my spine. All 3 of the senior divers were in one place. I recalled the thing Moose said to me last week, as well as the knowing glances I've seen those 3 share. Something was up. Do you think it was him? Clyde asked. Let's not jump to conclusions, Moose said. I heard voices by the river last night, Ryan said. Suddenly, the other 2 were silent and stared at him. The lures? Clyde asked. His voice hushed. I could barely make it out. Ryan nodded. Almost definitely. That breaks the agreement, though, Clyde said. He's not supposed to use those anymore. Well, he is for whatever reason. Ryan turned to Moose. Any idea what's going on? Moose started to respond when a tick snapped beneath my weight. The 3 men whirled around to look at me. That iciness was still in Moose's eyes. But I also noted a twinge of fear. About time you got here, Clyde said from beside him, seemingly unaware that I had been standing there for a while. We've got bad news. He stepped aside so I could see the body more clearly. My blood ran cold the moment I laid eyes on it. I was already reeling from the conversation I had just overheard, and the sight of a body only compounded that confusion. It was Michael, one of the new search and rescue divers. He laid on his back in full Scooby gear, minus a mask. I moved forward and knelt beside the body. Michael was new to search and rescue, and he had actually recently attended a few classes I taught. Tears stung my eyes as I stared down at him. What the fuck happened? As if in response to my silent question, Moose spoke up. For some reason, he was diving in the river. We think he got swept up in a strong current and hit his face on the rock, knocking his air regulator off and causing him to drown. We haven't found the regulator or his mask anywhere. I continued to stare at the dead man in front of me. Why was he in the water? I asked. The three men exchanged glances. We don't know, Clyde said. We think he may have been looking for the boy that we never recovered. I knew they were lying. Michael was one of the most straight-edge divers I'd ever met. He would never break a minor safety regulation, let alone go diving alone in rough waters. It just didn't add up. Additionally, there was another reason their claim didn't make any sense. Michael had been out of town visiting family on the day the boy went missing. Why would he come back if he wasn't even there for the initial search? He wouldn't even know where to look. I knew not to argue, though. I didn't want them to know I had suspected anything. Clyde and Ryan were unaware I had been to Badwater. Assuming Moose kept his secret. From what I could tell, he had. They acted as they always had towards me. Just then, an ambulance pulled up. The others left me alone with Michael's body while they talked to the driver. As I looked at the body, I realized something was off. There weren't any contusions on his face. If the current had actually dashed him against the rock, there should be at least a bruise. But there was nothing. His face, completely unharmed. At that moment I noticed something strange. A bruise peeked out from the neck of his dive suit. I pulled the rubber down to reveal a splotchy blue and black mark that circled his neck. It looked like he had been strangled. My thoughts immediately turned to those strange hand things I had seen at Badwater. But if that's what killed him, then why did they let him go? Was it a warning? A deep sense of dread settled into my stomach just then, and it's only gotten worse ever since. After the ambulance took Michael's body away, I returned home feeling drained. I couldn't bring myself to do anything that day and only sat in cold silence. I slept fitfully that night, plagued by the nightmares I mentioned earlier. Most of yesterday passed in the same cold silence as the day before. I felt numb. The conversation I had overheard between the older divers kept playing over and over in my head. What did they mean by lures? Who was this him that they kept referring to? I recalled what Ryan had said about hearing voices near the river. That must be the lures they had been talking about. As I sat there, my numbness faded and was replaced with anger. Michael was dead, and it had something to do with Moose and his secrets. It probably had something to do with those lures too. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. I was going to see what Ryan had meant when he said he heard voices. I wish I hadn't gone. I should have just stayed home and let it go. There are some things in this world that should just remain unseen. I wandered the riverbank for 30 minutes hearing nothing but the sounds of nocturnal animals. I was just about to head back when I heard something just out of earshot. It sounded like someone's voice. The sound grew louder as I headed up the bank until I could finally make out what he was saying. Help! Please! I can't swim! Instincts took over, and I began to sprint in the direction of the voice. I eventually lost track of where I was and stumbled blindly through the underbrush, barely even using my flashlight and relying on my hearing. Finally, the voice came from the water right next to me. It sounded like a child. I was about to wade into the river when something stopped me in my tracks. I listened to the voice carefully. Help! Please! I can't swim! It was the exact same words, over and over again, as if it was being played on loop. The tone was exactly the same every time. It didn't sound right. They were yelling, but it didn't sound like someone who was actually scared. There was no urgency in their voice. My heart pounded in my chest. I shined my flashlight along the river. That's when I saw it, a face pressed out of the mud of the riverbank. Like the hands I had seen. It was seaweed green, and roots grew from its edges and into the surrounding earth. It was like someone had constructed a human head out of algae or moss. The mouth opened and closed, repeating the same call for help over and over again, while the rest of the face remained flat and emotionless. My whole body shook as I stared at the thing. Just beyond it, in the water, I saw two of those hands reaching up from the shallows, grasping at anything and everything. A cold realization came upon me. Michael must have heard that thing's call for help and immediately suited up, only to dive in and find himself dragged under by those groping hands. This is what Ryan had meant by lures. I felt sick to my stomach as I watched the eerie face continuing to yell. The cries grew quieter and more spaced out until the face became completely silent. Then, without warning, it retreated into the earth, burying itself in a thin layer of mud. I shuddered to think about that thing just beneath the surface. Then I realized that there could be more. Who knew how many of them were lurking just below me? I sprinted back to my car, disgust driving me more than fear. When I got home, I sat up all night thinking about what I saw. I managed to sleep for a couple hours just before the sunrise, but was woken by the nightmares once again. I don't know what to do anymore. There are twisted things happening here, and even if I did have the power to stop them, I don't think I want to face this darkness alone. It feels like some great puzzle, and I'm missing the one or two pieces that I need to bring everything together. I've packed the bare necessities into bags, which now sit by my front door. I think I'm going to leave. Problem is, I don't know where I would go. I don't have family outside of town, and I don't exactly have a fortune in my savings account. Still, some part of me feels obligated to stay, both out of curiosity and because I owe it to Michael. Hell, not just Michael. I owe it to the countless people who have likely fallen victim to those things in the river. Isn't that why I took this job in the first place? I have much to think about. If this is my last post, know that I moved away and never looked back. If I do investigate further, I'll try to keep you guys updated, so long as those fucking hands don't get me first.